There's this pressure I think most people feel constantly and never talk about. And especially in this day and age where, social media is so huge and everyone's constantly comparing themselves for, one metric to another, I really think that there's a lot of pressure to do something. Like whatever the situation is, it could be a conflict with someone, a decision you have to make, something that happened that you don't know how to handle. I think there's often this immediate pull to act, to respond, to fix it, address it, say something, do something, to move. And I think we've been trained into that. Like somewhere along the way, the idea got planted that doing nothing is the same as giving up, that inaction is weakness, and that if something is happening in your life and you're not actively responding to it, you're failing in some way. And I really want to push back on that hard, because I think some of the worst decisions I've ever made came from the pressure to do something when the honest truth was that the right move was to do absolutely nothing at all. There's a concept in Taoism, and the literal translation of it's called Wu Wei. Literal translation of it is non-doing or non-action. And it's not just about doing nothing, it's about not forcing. And that's why I find it so interesting, and that's why I bring it up in today's video, is that how it's about recognizing when action is actually working against you. When the thing you're pushing against would resolve itself is if you just stopped pushing. When the most powerful move available to you is to be still. And I think at first it definitely sounds paradoxical, right? Despite us hearing, the best action is inaction so many times probably, when we really think about it, I think a lot of us don't follow it because it genuinely does not sound like it makes sense. How does order come from not acting? But if we zoom out, and I think if we give it the time that it deserves to be heard, think about how many situations you've made worse by reacting too fast. How many things you've forced that fell apart because of the forcing. How many times you sent the message you shouldn't have sent. And the thing in the heat of the moment that you couldn't take back, made the decision in a state of emotion, those are things that you probably had to spend days cleaning up, or weeks repairing, or months fixing. The action made it worse, and the inaction would have let it resolve quietly or peacefully. I think about this a lot in terms of conflict specifically, because when something happens, when someone says something or does something, or a situation arises that gets under your skin, the ego has a very immediate and very loud response. And the ego's response is almost always to react, defend, prove the point, don't let something go unanswered. And the ego frames inaction as losing, almost as if you don't respond, if you don't say something, if you just sit there, that means you're letting the other person win or the other group win. And that means you're weak. That means you're letting someone walk over you. But that's actually almost never true. And what inaction and conflict usually means is that you're playing a longer game than your immediate feelings want you to play. It means you're giving the situation room to breathe instead of pouring fuel on it. It means you're refusing to let your worst moment define what happens next. And here's the thing about the ego's version of events. The one that says you have to respond now or you lose, it expires really quickly. Like, if you just wait, even an hour, even a day, the urgency dissolves, and then you can see the situation clearly. And usually what you see is that the response you are about to give would have made everything significantly worse. And if that proves something, I think it proves that pausing is the move. It's not a weakness. And there's also a version of this that's less about conflict and more about life decisions in general. And I think this is where it gets really interesting, because I've noticed something about the moments in my life where I've been the most restless, yes, the most desperate to make something happen, the most convinced that I need to do something right now or everything is going to fall apart. Those moments almost always come from fear, not from clarity, not from a genuine sense that action is needed, but from fear that if I'm not moving, then nothing is moving, that if I'm not forcing something, nothing will happen at all. And what I've learned slowly and honestly is that one of the best feelings is knowing that your feeling is unreliable. And what I mean by that is when you recognize that feeling in itself is such a temporary thing, you understand how worse of a guide it is. And it makes you appreciate the ability to interact so much more. When you're in this state, when you're in that restless, anxious, I need to do something mode, your judgment is basically offline. And you're not seeing the situation, but you're seeing your fear of the situation, or you're seeing your anger of the situation. And those things are very different. And the decisions that come out of that state are almost always ones you look back on later and go, yeah, I should have waited. I should have just let that sit. Or I should have done nothing until I could actually see clearly. I want to say something here, though, because I think there's an easy misreading of this. This is not an argument for passivity. It's not an excuse to avoid hard things, avoid hard conversations, avoid the difficult decisions that need to be made. There's a difference between strategic inaction and just being avoidant. And they can look almost identical from the outside, but feel completely different from the inside. Avoidance feels like relief. It's like, oh, thank God I don't have to deal with that right now. Like you're running from something. On the other hand, strategic inaction feels like restraint. Like you're holding something. Like there's a pull towards acting and you're consciously choosing not to, because you can see that acting right now isn't going to serve you. You're not running from the thing. You're standing in front of it and deciding that this is not the moment. That distinction matters a lot, because if you use this idea as permission to just never do the hard thing, to always tell yourself that waiting is the wise move when actually you're just scared, that's just avoidance. And I've actually done some research into this, and I think the neuroscience side of this is really interesting too. And I usually don't go into that much science in my videos, but fun fact, it is my favorite subject. So when you're in an emotionally heightened state, or whether you're angry, anxious, stressed, hurt, whatever it may be, the part of your brain that handles long-term thinking and rational decision-making is genuinely less active. The prefrontal cortex, which is part responsible for reasoning and seeing consequences, takes longer to process than the emotional response does, which means your first action to something difficult is almost always going to be less accurate than your reaction after you've given it time. In other words, your first reaction is fast, but fast doesn't mean right. And knowing that, actually knowing it and using it, it changes how you move through situations. Because instead of trusting the urgency of your first reaction, you start to recognize it as a signal to pause. Not forever, not indefinitely, just long enough for the thinking part of you to catch up with the feeling part of you, and then you decide. I think the hardest part of all of this is that inaction looks the same from the outside, regardless of what's driving it. Nobody can tell the difference between you not responding because you've made a conscious, grounded decision to let something sit, and you not responding because you're afraid or checked out or don't care. Which means you have to really be honest with yourself about which one it is. And I think that's actually the whole skill here, because it's not just learning when to act and when not to, but being honest enough with yourself to know the difference between the two in any given moment. Your brain will absolutely dress up avoidance as wisdom if you let it. It'll tell you very convincing stories about why right now isn't the moment, when actually right now is exactly the moment and you're just scared. So the question to ask yourself isn't, should I act or should I not act? The question is this restraint or is this fear wearing restraint's clothes? Water is the thing Taoist philosophy always comes back to on this. The idea is that water is the softest thing in the world, and yet it carves through rock. Not because it forces, not because it attacks, because it's consistent and it goes where the path already exists, and it doesn't resist the shape of things. It just keeps moving in the way that's natural to it, and eventually the rock gives way. And I think that's what that looks like as a person. The person who doesn't react to every provocation, my bad, who doesn't force every outcome, who knows when to move and when to be still, who trusts that the right things will happen if they stay consistent and don't panic into bad decisions. That person isn't passive. That person is actually playing the whole thing at a completely different level. So, you take anything away from this video, know that not every situation needs a response. Not every feeling needs to be acted on immediately. And not every moment of restlessness is a signal to move. Sometimes the bravest, smartest, most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. And then wait and let the water do its work. See you guys next time.